Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of dtalks or Disruptive Talks on literacy and education. I'm your host, Mashood. In the talks, which have featured speakers, nearly 150 speakers from 18 countries, and a special focus on India and some amazing ideas, some amazing personalities and organizations that have been disrupting the status quo of education in India, we bring to you another one a powerful idea, another one powerful person and organization who have been leading change at the very grassroots in education, in early learning, as well as early childhood education as well. And the focus of today's discussion is going to be on how we are able to give our children a very good start and very good early start in developing not just their foundation skills, but also the very core life skills and the socio-emotional well-being, the resilience of a child, in fact, is developed in the very early years. And the very backbone infrastructure of helping children have that early start is the Anganwadis in India. So we are going to focus on how strengthening of Anganwadis can be done and has been done, uh, which it has a very clear link, as the national education policy also says, has a very clear link with how the learning outcomes are in the early grades. So to speak on this issue, we're very honored to have Mr. Nilesh Nimkar. Nilesh ji, as we know, he is a founder, trustee, and director of Quest, which is Quality Education Support Trust, and has a very rich and diverse experience of more than 2 decades in the field of early childhood education, elementary education, teacher capacity building, and curriculum development as well. And he has also been someone who has been, he's been very renowned and has won several awards. He's in fact been the recipient of the Maharashtra Foundation Award for Outstanding Social Work in the field of education and the Extraordinary Early Childhood Education Leadership Award as well. So we are really honored to have you, Nilesh, on today's dtalks, and we really look forward to your presentation. And after which we would like to take up some questions for discussion as well. So, sir, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Masood. Let me just start the presentation.
We would also request those who are joining us live uh, to also share your questions. आप भी जो हमें live देख रहे हैं अपने questions को chat पे जरूर share करें. And we like to take some of these questions towards the end of Nilesh ji's presentation as well.
Is my presentation visible, Masood?
Yes, Nilesh ji, we are able to see your presentation. Yeah.
Okay. So, so today's topic is strengthening Anganwadis for effective implementation of foundational literacy and numeracy mission. So, as all of us know, that India has set certain targets for under the SDG 4 to be achieved by 2030. And two of these targets are very interesting. One is that all young persons and the majority of the adults will attain proficiency in literacy and numeracy by end of 2030. Now, if you really see that if we are talking about 2030, and if this target is to be achieved, then adults, young persons whom we are really targeting at, they are right now in the preschools probably. The second target is regarding the ECE services, that by 2030 we also wish to make ECE services available to almost every child in the country. And if that is something what the goal that the country has set, then Anganwadis are very critical infrastructure, or that network is really a critical infrastructure to achieve this goal. It was because of these goals, it was natural that this will get reflected in our policy. So NEP has proposed a sort of a age group of 3 to 8, and a foundational stage has been proposed for this. The policy clearly says that there is not going to be any infrastructural change as such, but it is a curriculum continuum that the policy has envisioned. Now, if you really see, most of the children in the age group of 3 to 6 are under Anganwadi, and those who are in the age group of 6 to 8 are in the primary schools. So, essentially, these are two different departments of the government who will be catering to these children. For a child, it is one learning continuum. As a curriculum, it is one continuum. However, it will be handled by two different departments. And that is something what is going to be a challenge in the coming years, because these two departments will have to work in collaboration with each other. When I'm talking about Anganwadis, let me just show you some numbers. So if you see in India, there are about 13.5 lakhs Anganwadis. In Maharashtra itself, it is around 1 lakh. And that's the huge network that we have to cater to the children in the age group of 3 to 6. If you compare this number with the largest private chain, which is Kidsy, they have around 1700 schools across the country. And probably another major player has some 1100 schools in the country. Now, if you really look at the numbers and share the difference between the numbers, we can easily conclude that if we want to really make foundational literacy and numeracy a reality for every child, we cannot just afford to neglect Anganwadis. And that's why today's topic is how do we really strengthen them to impart effective foundational literacy and numeracy instruction and convert them into preschools. I would first like to give you some idea about what is the status of Anganwadi today is. So basically, Anganwadi is a grassroots level center of a scheme called Integrated Child Development Services by the government. So there are 6 different services which are offered by Anganwadi, which are like immunization, nutrition, prenatal care. So there is a bunch of services that the Anganwadi worker has to offer in the village. One of the 6 services is, of course, early childhood education. If you really look at the complexity of the task that an Anganwadi worker handles, it is enormous. See, we people, when our children get sick, we go to the doctor. If they are having some nutritional problem, we go to the nutritionist. In a village, the Anganwadi worker has to play all these roles all in one. Naturally, what happens is that the early childhood education takes backseat, and that's why that is the most neglected service of the ICDS. Uh, the hazards of malnutrition, the hazards of lack of immunization are immediately apparent. That you can see them immediately. But when it comes to the education part of Anganwadi, the hazards are not really seen in immediate future. So it is but natural that this service always takes a backseat. And that's why strengthening of Anganwadis as far as the early childhood education service is concerned is going to be extremely critical if we want to make foundational literacy and numeracy a reality. Now, I would really like to start with a quote by eminent educationist Professor Krishna Kumar. So he was also he's also NCRT's ex-director. And in one of his articles, uh, he has written that by making foundational literacy and numeracy a target for early schooling, we will stress further an embattled childhood. Now, a senior educationist like him is taking this position, and we have to really then understand that whatever we are going to do, are we really going to burden children with the load of the early literacy and numeracy, or are we going to help them lay a sound foundation? In order to answer this question, we would need to really deep dive into some theoretical aspects of what do we mean by literacy, what do we understand by literacy. So I'm going to do that, say, in next 2-3 minutes, and then we will come back to the Anganwadis again. Now, when we talk about literacy instruction for young children, The prevalent approach in most of the preschools around you will find is a skill based approach. So I mean, typically how a child would become literate, our notion is that yes, you teach them the letters of the alphabet, you teach them the matras, you teach them words, and somehow the child will start figuring out how to make sense from the text. So the entire focus of literacy instruction has been on introduction of the script, teaching the script, and writing the script as the adults write them. Now, this is something what is called skill-based instruction, which is extremely prevalent in many of the private schools today. There is every danger that we may go and scale up this kind of an instruction to the Anganwadis, and that will be really detrimental for child's development. And precisely, this is the kind of approach that the Professor Krishna Kumar is also criticizing, because this skill-based approach completely neglects the purpose of literacy, the why the child has to become literate. The meaning making part is completely neglected in this approach. So if you ask any progressive educator, you will get an answer that the purpose of literacy, becoming literate, is to make meaning from the text. The purpose of writing is to really put your own ideas, thoughts on the paper and communicate it in an effective way. When right from the beginning this kind of a skill-based approach is really adopted, it becomes extremely difficult for children to cope with it, especially those children who are the first generation school goers. They don't have literate environments around them, and hence this skill training or drill on the script becomes completely a counterproductive thing for them. It is very obvious that if we continue this kind of approach rather than creating a sound foundation, we will have troubles children enjoying reading, we will have trouble children getting ahead. So is there a solution to this problem? Yes, of course. Over the past few decades, a lot of research has gone in, especially in the Western countries, but now also there is a growing body of research in India, in our own context, which shows that there has to be something called balanced literacy approach. So when I talk about balance, of course, there is going to be some kind of a skill part involved in it, as it was in the traditional way, but there is lot more to be balanced around it. On the right hand side of my slide, if you can really see, the child has scribbled something and she has read aloud what she has written. Now, obviously, the script that the child has put on the paper is not legible for us, but it is extremely meaningful for the child to write in that way. The script that you see below, which is Marathi, which is in the Devanagari script, so that is something what the teacher has written as the child has read the passage. Now, these kind of activities are extremely important in the beginning of the literacy. So when we talk about scaling up literacy to Anganwadis, if we go with the thing that is on my left hand side of the slide, it is going to be detrimental. But if we practice the balanced literacy approach, it will really lay a sound foundation for the further literacy development. So let me just elaborate quickly on what do I mean by balanced literacy approach. So this approach really believes that speaking, reading, writing, these are all complementary acts. So they feed into each other. You're speaking with the oral language. When it is written, it strengthens your expression. The written language, when it is read, it improves your orality. So they really feed back into each other. They are complementary to each other. And hence they are not the skills, mere cognitive skills, which are to be taught one after another. And that is something what, if we really believe, on both sides of both the ends of my slide, you can see that picture, script, and expression, everything is going hand in hand. These are the pictures which I have just collected from the Anganwadis where this kind of approach has been introduced and successfully utilized. So literacy is a continuum which keeps on developing throughout our life, and probably children are always on this continuum. So I mean, we can't really say that, okay, yesterday I was illiterate and today I became literate. That's not the case. We are always on a continuum, and children over here, whatever they are scribbling, whatever they are trying to express themselves using their own invented script and their vocabulary and their pictures, is all writing at that particular age. So now this really changes the complete perspective of looking at literacy. Literacy is not merely learning letters by rote or drilling letters and getting commands somehow on the alphabet so that you can read further. The act of reading is much more complex. The act of writing is mainly meant for expression, and these are the notions which the child has to really form right from the beginning, so that the literacy development becomes, or the journey of literacy becomes, a meaningful and enjoyable journey. Now, literacy, in the balanced literacy approach, one has to believe that literacy has to be integral part of our daily activities. If you see in the photographs, you can see that the labels that are been displayed on the, or the instructions that have been displayed on the wall, the child who is signing a sort of a muster that is hung on the wall. These are the acts which promote the use of literacy. So while child is becoming literate, uh, the child is also aware that these are certain things which is part of my life. When children come from what you call illiterate homes, where both the mother and the parent are not literate, then this kind of environment is extremely critical, because they really don't see any use of literacy at home. And that's why Anganwadi is a place which can really introduce them these kind of print rich environment, what they name. The other notion that children have to really understand when they come to the school is that written language is a sort of another form of their oral language. So in India, if you really see, we work in the tribal belts, so there are almost 11, 12 languages, tribal languages, just in Maharashtra. And if we insist that children should become literate only in the state language or in the language of instruction, it's just not possible. So it's important that we give enough respect and enough space for children to use their own language and express themselves in the context of the child. So that's the to the. Now, at this point of time, it is extremely important for the teacher to note that home language is not a barrier. In fact, it is a great resource to learn, and unless we really respect that, it is in vain expecting that children will become literate meaningfully. The thing that is true for literacy is also true for numeracy, because numeracy also has to be in the context. The picture that you are right now seeing on the screen is, children have collected some data. They are from Anganwadi, and they have collected some data regarding the weekly weather. So there is a chart that was given to them, on which they used to just mark that did they see sun, did they see clouds, or these kind of things. And later on, they have converted it into a pictograph. Now these children know numbers only up to 20, but the numbers that they know are being used to really solve the daily life problem, to understand certain more things about your own environment. So it is necessary that numeracy and literacy both are to be embedded in the context of the child. Now, does this really work? We have a small data set for you to show. Uh, this is a longitudinal study about which we have published a paper now. But if you see that children in the age, for the first three years, right from March 14 to April 16, they were under intervention. And the blue line is showing you the result of the control group, while the orange line is showing you the result of the children under the intervention. Our intervention ended in June 16, and children entered into grade 1. Post that, there wasn't any intervention. But if you really see the difference between the two lines, it's still persistent. Later on, towards the March 19, there is a drop in the performance, obviously, because these this assessment is at the grade appropriate level. But still, there is significant gap between the two groups even after the intervention ceases. So there is a sort of proof for this, and I'm sure that many more studies like this will be required to come to a conclusive statement. However, it is the initial results are really encouraging, and that I think because of this, it is really necessary that we really focus on what they call as balanced literacy approach. Now, the question is that can Anganwadis offer a sound balanced literacy program? Because as I told you, it is only one of the 6 services. Anganwadi, there is no pre-qualification to become an Anganwadi teacher. So you can be an Anganwadi worker, and maybe after you work for 6 years, 8 years, you get some kind of a training which is for a few days or for a few months. Normally, the qualification of the Anganwadi workers range from 10th pass to postgraduate, anything between that. Hence, there is a valid question that has been normally asked: that is it really possible that an Anganwadi worker who herself might struggle with some of these ideas can implement this kind of a program? I think that over my past 20 years of experience, we have seen that if you give a sort of small input at a time and continue with that over a long period of time, then Anganwadi workers are very much capable of delivering this kind of literacy instruction program in their Anganwadis. Uh, when we start engaging with them, the horizon that we have to keep has to be at least 3 years, not less than that. And the minimum administrative unit has to be one ICDS project, which is typically from 100 to 250 Anganwadi, cluster of 100 to 50 and 250 Anganwadis. It is absolutely necessary that you sort of have a small team within the project built in, invest certain resources in them, uh, build their capacities, and this resource team later on achieves the universalization of the program in the given ICDS project. So that is the kind of strategy that has evolved over a period of time, which I would like to share with you. Another important part is the on-site support that is really required. So Anganwadi workers learn during the workshop, but they consolidate their learning on the site while they are actually working. So it is really necessary that the on-site support is provided on a regular basis, so that whatever they have learned in the workshop can be really practiced and troubleshooting happens during the on-site support. So the question that is normally asked is that is it really possible? Our work shows that yes, it is possible. It all depends that how do we plan for it, how carefully do we really design the whole program and then implement it.
Uh,
So so that's where I would like to take a pause and go for question answers, if any.
Thank you, Nilesh, for helping us understand the whole the larger structure of how early childhood education is framed in India, and you really help demystify the various approaches in which language acquisition and how the whole the science or the kind of the idea behind how what really makes it possible for large scale acquisition of foundational literacy and numeracy, and in fact why some of the challenges, like the whole national education policy talking about a mission for foundational literacy and numeracy clearly shows that there has been serious challenges in achieving this on a large scale, but now with at the very top level there is now interest to help resolve this issue. And I think the ideas which you have shared really are very powerful ideas which help inform the policy, and what happens on the ground is informing the top-down policy. So it's very valuable. Thanks for sharing this. To start with, Nilesh, you talked about an approach where we are talking about balanced literacy. And it was the quote which you mentioned from Mr. Krishna Kumarji also, right? That often the the focus on getting children to learn how to read the script, write the script, it becomes really stressful from a very young age. And in fact, we see post the COVID, there is again a lot of buzz around learning losses and gaps in foundational literacy and numeracy, and many children coming to school for the first time in their lives after 2 years. In this situation, what is your assessment of how do we where do we begin? Where do early grade teachers, while you have talked about Anganwadis, but how where do early grade teachers, for example, begin addressing this issue, which seems such a big problem right now?
So I think that, I mean, we will have to do certain things which are expected in the preschool. So the teachers can definitely start with creating a print-rich environment around them, and especially, I mean, when children come to your classroom first, uh, one has to ensure that the child is emotionally stable, especially when we are talking about the children who are coming from the underserved families. uh, they have undergone probably a trauma of pandemic. Some of them might have lost job, some of their parents might have lost job, some of them might have been burdened with the household responsibilities, they might have undergone some really pressures that a childhood that any child should not be undergoing. So the first and foremost task for a teacher is to really, create a conducive environment in the school and listen to the children, because often we are in a hurry to make up the learning loss, but the loss will be more if we don't really listen to the children. So listening to the children is a very important part. What had been their experiences, what had been, how they have been coping with the pandemic. So children have a lot to share. So starting from there, one can really start building upon it. So you cannot really, come and start your textbook right on day one and say that, okay, this is the first lesson, you start with it. That will be really detrimental. The second thing is that, when we talk about grade 1 and 2 and 3, even today there are only few Anganwadis through which children get this kind of an input. So one can safely assume that one has to start from the scratch, and don't assume and do not assume anything that children have really got a very substantial input in literacy, and that's how one has to really start. There are a couple of things that teachers can really do, is that reading aloud regularly to the children, doing shared reading exercises with them, or creating a sort of a print rich environment around them, whereby you display a lot of text in your classrooms. Write for children, so children tell you and you write it on the blackboard, is a very important activity, because that's how the connect between the oral language and the written language is going to happen. So typically these are the kind of things that one advocates in the balanced literacy approach. One has to start with that. So you have to start from scratch. That's how I would like to say.
Great. And Nileshi, your organization Quest has worked at the grassroots in with teachers across the not just the elementary, like from starting from the early childhood all the way up to elementary and higher as well. So in a way, your team has really understood and analyzed the challenges and the successes and what works and what doesn't work across the school grade. So in that sense, if you see, if when we talk about this, transition from the early childhood stage to early grades, and now the NEP is calling it foundational. What is your assessment of some of the gaps in this transition from Anganwadis to early grades? And what would be some of your recommendations on how this bridge can be made more stronger?
So as I said that, there is a lot of need for, bringing in theoretical and clarity and practical competence for Anganwadi workers. So is the case with the primary teachers, because primary teachers have hardly got any opportunity to really teach children who are that young. So if you really ask, I mean, in Maharashtra, we have almost, I mean, 99% teachers are trained, but they are trained for what? So if you really look at the pre-service curriculum, if you really look at the input that goes through the in-service curriculum, there is hardly any orientation about how to teach young children how to really, what are the fundamentals of teaching at what are the fundamentals of literacy instruction. So these are the things which are, sort of making it more difficult for children to come from Anganwadi and settle in primary schools, because suddenly there is a change, suddenly the approach changes, suddenly the way of teaching changes. So actually, our teachers in grade 1 and 2 would require a robust input, as our Anganwadi workers would really require. And there has to be a sort of a common understanding between both of them about what do we mean by literacy, how do we teach literacy, how do we really, address the problem of numeracy. There has to be some shared understanding between the two. And unless that shared understanding is created, I think this transition from Anganwadi to the primary schools is always going to remain a challenge for us. It's really funny, but the younger the child you teach, your profession is of less importance. That's the kind of notion that our society has. So if you really see, for teaching in Anganwadis, anybody can teach. Maybe if in primary you need a diploma holder, and as you go progress further, you need a PhD holder probably in the college. But the thing is that the theoretical understanding of these people will really matter. And I think that one has to really invest in capacity building of Anganwadi workers as well as the primary teachers, so that there is some shared understanding, and the recent knowledge in this field reaches out to them, and thereby it benefits the children.
Uh, Thanks for sharing this idea, Nileshi. And you've also mentioned another important point on multilingual context, right? And
Yeah.
Maharashtra, for example, like you mentioned, has several dialects, tribal languages, and of course, Marathi being the medium of instruction. In this context, what has been the experience of your team with respect to addressing this multilingual education? And have are there any success stories where, for example, the parents who are of the children from different linguistic backgrounds have been, have been successfully engaged with in their child's learning? How has this question been addressed in the communities that your team is working in?
Okay. So first thing is that, I mean, one has to understand that children who come, who are the first generation to come to the school, their parents have sent them to the school, and now you don't really expect them any more from them, because it's really unfair to them. They have to earn their bread, they have to do their household chores, everything, and on the top of that, they being themselves not literate, what more can you really expect from them? That's the question that we have to ask. Having said that, we have seen that, I mean, they have been extremely helpful in supporting children just by sitting together, browsing through the books, looking at the pictures, talking about them in their own language, trying to explain them what the picture might mean, and going through the same process almost as much as the child is going through. So these are the kind of things that one has to really do. So the simple thing that the Anganwadi or the school can do is that send the books home. Even if the parents are illiterate, they can just sit and browse through them, and that gives a lot of support for the child and establishes the importance of reading in that sense. So that is one thing. Another thing is that teachers have to really work on multilingualism seriously, because there is a prevalent notion is that I mean, something called correct language and a non-correct language, and that is something what is very dangerous. So if you really see, the child's home language is always seen as a barrier, as a problem. So even the discourse is around the problem of home language. Now, how any language can really be a problem? So one has to really respect the home language, allow children to speak freely, express themselves freely in their own language rather than insisting on a particular language. So tomorrow, if I mean, consider an example. If you're teaching some concept in mathematics and the child is not getting it because you're telling that in Marathi, because the child doesn't understand Marathi, what is the option to you? The option is just keep the language aside and speak the language that the child understands. And same is the case with the English medium schools. I mean, there has been quite a shift to the English medium schools, and there have been mushrooming of English medium schools in the rural areas. if you really see that many a times the teacher is really struggling hard to put across certain things to the children in the language that they just don't understand. Now, this kind of insistence on a language at the cost of understanding is really going to be detrimental as far as our targets about foundational literacy and numeracy is concerned. Because being literate doesn't mean just being able to decode. Being literate means that the child has to make sense. And if the child is not making sense, what is the point in insisting on certain language? So wherever this multilingual situation is actually very common across the states. However, it is very understudied. There have been certain policies designed, maybe the Odisha government designed some policy for the tribals over there. So there have been certain experiments in certain pockets, but this is something what we really need to understand in more depth. We need a rigorous research on this, and certain multilingual strategies need to be really put in practice. So we have been working on this for the past 11 odd years, and we have got some elementary preliminary hints about how the multilingual classroom can really look like. But I would say that a lot more needs to be done. We need to study the phenomena well, and then really add to it. The first thing that one has to really remember is that don't look at anybody's language as a problem. Look at it as a resource, and better make use of it for the learning purpose.
Uh, right, Nilesh, thank you for sharing your ideas on multilingual education. And there is also now, especially post COVID, a lot of focus on using technology as a tool, which was something which was, earlier it was more associated with STEM and, the middle and the higher grades. But now it's being used actually as a mainstream tool for learning and assessments, even for younger grades, as well as we are aware. And in fact, there are some now ideas on using tech-based solutions at the level of Anganwadis as well. What is your assessment and opinion of such interventions that aim to use technology for parent engagement and learning at the level of age 3 to 6?
Okay. So, technology is something what is a tool. It is not absolutely a replacement for human interaction. And that is something, at the most, the technology could be utilized to, increase the interaction between the child and the human. So somehow, when you talk about the tech-based solutions, we believe that if we send the content to the child is going to consume the content, and the interaction between the content and the child is just sufficient to learn, which is not the fact. And we have been, there has been ample evidence from outside the India and from within the India that just one-way interaction between the technology-based driven content and child is just not sufficient. And that's why let us not really be very optimistic and go gaga about it. I'm not even talking about the kind of problems that we face in the tribal belts, whereby having such kind of a conversation seamlessly on the video is just not possible. So what is happening is that people would just send some SMS or maybe a WhatsApp message and some content through it, and believe that by looking at that content and message, the child is going to learn. And it goes on a very large scale with very limited resource. So even people get to feel that, okay, we are doing something at really large scale and really good, but that doesn't happen. We have enough data, we have enough case studies which are telling us that directly using technology as a replacement for the significant adult is not a solution. At the most, the technology can be really used to get in touch with the children, to help parents to really engage children with the children in much better way. So I know a few organizations, we were also part of that, who what they did was that they short video clips of how to engage with the child one-on-one, and they send them these video clips to the parents using technology, and the parent was supposed to look at that video clip and teach their children. Slowly, what happened? Parents started doing the activities with children, and they started sending them back to the central group, and that's how the interaction started happening. Here, the role of technology is not just to provide content, not just to really ask the child to consume content, but how to get in touch with the child, to establish that human contact, which is so critical in this age group. And that's why I believe that, this kind of an interaction cannot be done for a longer time of the day. So it's definitely not a solution to the school, solution to the reopening of the schools, or solution to be in the school. And it is to be seen only as a means which you use during the peaks of pandemic. Now, if somebody is thinking about doing everything online, I think we are fooling ourselves.
Right, Nilesh. Uh, you also talked about like teachers, and initially you also talked about how teachers even in the early grades now have to kind of play some role of a preschool teacher as well, because especially post the pandemic. And we are now also seeing that even beyond the early years, beyond the grade 3, there are a lot of children with gaps in their foundational skills, and that of course has challenges keeping up with grade level curriculum. Now your team has worked on the whole spectrum from early childhood to elementary as well. uh, how how do you work with teachers to kind of help them address these gaps in foundational literacy and numeracy? And it must be quite I mean, often teachers might feel demotivated as well, that even beyond grade 5 there are children with FLN gaps. So would you like to share some experiences about how Quest has worked with teachers in maybe building their motivation, their capacity, and specifically to address these gaps in foundational literacy, which keep compounding, as one goes ahead?
Yeah. So, even pre-pandemic, these gaps were really evident. So we have data of about 13,000 plus children, which shows that several of them are struggling with the foundational literacy and numeracy, and as a result, they cannot cope with the grade appropriate curriculum. So this situation is not new. What we have done right now is that we have published a study with in a journal called Children First, which is the DCPCR journal from Delhi. So that shows that there has been certain loss that has happened in certain types of competencies, especially with the complex reading comprehension. I'm talking about children in grade say 5 to 7. So they were able to do certain things before the pandemic because we had a very robust baseline just done in February 2020. And then we did subsequent study by giving parallel tests to them. And it is very clear that children have lost the complex reading comprehension abilities. What do I mean by the complex reading comprehension? That if you give them a news article to read and ask a question which is trying to summarize the news article, they were able to do it before, but now they are not able to do it. So something like that, just to quote an example. Now, as far as the teachers are concerned, not that they don't know this fact. The problem is that how to address it is something what is not really known to them. So first thing is that we need to have certain kind of a diagnostic tool available in the regional languages. So often it has been seen that in order to really decide your literacy level, these the grade appropriate passage, level appropriate passage, these are the things which come from English. But have we really invested enough in the regional languages to make those things in that way? So this kind of diagnostic tools, this kind of leveled material is something what is badly needed in the regional languages. And if you create that and make it available to the teachers, that makes a lot of sense. In the initial contact, of course, the teachers are really worried about it, that why we should be doing it, something that the child should have learned 4 years ago. But the fact is that if the number of such children goes to say something like 50%, 60% in your classroom, then it is not the problem with the child, then it is the lack of input, which is very clear. And having 50, 60% of your children at that level, what sense does it really make teaching them the grade appropriate curriculum? So that's the first kind of appeal that we really make to the teachers. Not that they don't see the sense in it. What we demand is that, okay, don't do anything, just give 45 to 50 minutes every day for these children. Rest of the time you do whatever you want, the way you have planned your calendar. That is the beginning appeal with which we go. It works. And if you really see that if you have a properly done program, a properly curated resource, and the skill set that you need to impart to the teachers, if you really work on these two things, very soon teachers start seeing the results. And that is the motivation. So the motivation doesn't come by motivational talks, I guess, So you may feel motivated during the talk, but when you go back to your school, you are back to the normal. So ultimately, if you see some change happening in your classroom, within your classroom, a child which has not been, able to write at all has started suddenly writing and expressing herself. That is something what is the motivation. So with this large chunk of children who are not at the grade level, why teachers feel demotivated with them? Because no matter what you do with them, they don't respond. Suddenly, when you give them an appropriate program, they start responding, they start showing progress, and probably the motivation comes from there. Once they see these things happening, they really expand the program on their own.
Right. Thanks for sharing this, Nilesh. And I think it's a very important point on building motivation through kind of demonstrating evidence of success. Right. It is actually the most powerful thing to kind of motivate a teacher rather than attending just training sessions and motivation, because
Yeah.
ultimately and the also idea that teachers can actually if they're able to also measure the evidence of the successes. So as a teacher, as a researcher, is also something which would be really motivating for the teacher as well. So Anlishi, it's
Masood, here it is very important that, the data should be for the teachers and not for the officers and the states and only for the policymakers. If the teacher is not going to make use of the data, no matter what, policies that you want to really frame, they are not going to work. So preliminary user of the data should be the teacher. What happens at a later stage is something what can wait. But what has happened is that, somehow, because of this pressure of achievement, and somehow because of, because everybody is telling that there has been a learning loss, you have to somehow quickly make it up, and pushing teachers in, somehow making that learning loss to disappear. So that is the kind of situation that you see in the field, which is not going to help us. If we really want teachers to understand what do we mean by using data for your own purpose, you have to give them time. And that's something what one has to really remember, and not just keep on pushing them for making up the learning loss.
right. Nilesh, truly wonderful to hear you talk and to hear some of your ideas. I think you've made some really powerful points on how we at this point of time the priority has to be on children's well-being, and not on making them making certain meeting certain targets and goals of foundational literacy and numeracy and getting to it quickly, because it's quite possible that if we rush things at this moment, it might be really counterproductive for the development and well-being of the children as well. And in Nilesh, in conclusion, if you would like to share any concluding thoughts on where do we need to go next now, and if you've talked about reform in Anganwadis, you've talked about reform in teaching learning within the elementary schools. What do you feel should be now needs to be the next step with respect to early childhood education and early grade education in the short term and the long term? I know I mean, it might, this particular question might itself need another 1 hour of talk, but who's most important priority in your mind? Where do we go next from here?
See, one of the stakeholders is the parents, So we have to really start talking about what do we mean by literacy, how children become literate, how parents can help them becoming literate, and what do we mean by being literate in true sense. These are the ideas that we have to really communicate, debate, toss to the parents, because on one side parents have really weird notion of literacy, and that is coming from this skill based approach which Krishna Kumar has tried to criticize. On other hand, there has been a body of knowledge which is telling us that, see, how best the house can support the child to become literate, and that one factor we have completely neglected. So creating a societal level awareness among the parents that what are the technical aspects of literacy, how child become literates. So these are the ideas which we have to simplify and communicate to the parents, seek their engagement into the whole process, and then the demand for the right kind of literacy will be really created. So on one hand, we have to really orient our teachers, strengthen them, invest in their professional development. On other hand, we have to really go at masses to really communicate that what do we mean by that the child becomes literate. So we have been working with the parents also during the lockdown, and it was surprising that even very educated parents told us that we never thought that becoming literate means this after undergoing the program. So this is the kind of awareness that has to really spread not only among the sort of underserved parents, but also those who are well educated, who can demand, because if they keep on demanding wrong things, these things are going to percolate everywhere. So it's absolutely a necessity that we really start debating this publicly. We try to pull in all the stakeholders like the media, the MLAs, the Panchayat Raj, and everybody, and start talking about that what exactly we need. Because unless we have a common shared understanding among ourselves, what we are scaling up, we don't know.
Right, Nilesh. Uh, on this very important point that we need to understand, come to a consensus, and communicate to everyone what we are trying to achieve is so crucial. And of course, with the new mission on Nipun Bharat, one of the more important emphasis is also on outreach to the community, to all stakeholders as to what we are trying to achieve. So we would like to again thank you, Nilesh ji, for joining us today here on the Disruptive Talks. I think your some of the questions that you have shared is something which all of us are going to take back to think more about in the work that we are doing, and we hope that we are able to answer some of these questions together in the coming time as well. Once again, thank you, Nilesh ji, for joining us on Detox.
Thank you, Masood.